Imagine living in a world where drinking water could literally kill you. You're in ancient Rome. It's hot. Your sandals are melting. You reach for a drink. But it's not water. It's wine. And not just at dinner. We're talking breakfast, lunch, midnight snack. Wine was basically the Roman version of a hydration plan. So why did the greatest empire in history treat wine like a life-saving beverage? Let's uncork the truth. In ancient Rome, the access to water didn't equal access to quality water. Basically, Roman water was borderline undrinkable, and not in the tap water tastes weird in a different city kind of way. This stuff was a bacterial cocktail. Unsurprisingly, this was the main reason why Romans preferred wine over it. If the truth be told, it was maybe a better option, and no one knew that better than the guys that consumed in suspiciously large quantities. The lack of drinkable water might sound surprising at first. After all, aren't these the same people who built aqueduct? Despite these magnificent feats of engineering, only the upper classes, especially the senatorial elite, could tap directly into these aqueducts for their private villas. Their water came in clean, relatively cool, and fresh from mountain sources, but that's not the case for your average Roman Joe. Sorry, Roman Gaius. Most people had to rely on public fountains, cisterns, and wells, many of which were communal, exposed to the elements, and filled with questionable surprises. And the Tiber River, that iconic ribbon of water flowing through Rome's heart, it was beautiful to look at, like a screensaver in real life, but functionally, it was Rome's open sewer. People bathed in it, did laundry in it, disposed of waste in it, and occasionally dumped an unlucky political rival into it. Even the fountains weren't safe. They were out in the open, meaning birds, rats, children with sticky hands, and every unwashed citizen in a 5-mile radius had their shot at blessing the supply before you even got a taste. And remember, water storage in those days meant ceramic or lead-lined containers, both of which have their own special contributions to public health. Hint, one gives you a weird metallic tang, the other gives you brain damage. In the countryside, things weren't much better. Farmers relied on rainwater catchment systems, streams, or shallow wells that were often contaminated by runoff from animal pens, cemeteries, or nearby latrines. That's not water. That's a biological experiment. The idea that tiny invisible organisms could float around your water and ruin your week would have sounded like sorcery, or at least something the Greeks made up to sound clever. They believed water could carry illness, but more in a bad vapors or offended gods kind of way. That didn't stop them from categorizing water, though. The Romans loved categories. Vitruvius, the Roman architect and engineer, once went on a whole tangent about the types of water you should avoid. Don't drink marsh water, he warned. Avoid salty water. Stay away from bitter water. Honestly, this could have been the first Yelp review for nature's beverages. In short, it was a pretty rough time to be a hydration enthusiast, so when someone offered you a diluted goblet of wine instead, something sour, a little funky, but fermented, acidic, and mildly antiseptic, you took it, gratefully. And maybe you didn't even get tipsy. You were just happy your drink didn't come with bonus amoebas. In the Roman world, wine wasn't just a beverage. It was a nutrient delivery system, an antiseptic, a tonic, and, depending on your budget and delusions of grandeur, a cure for everything from constipation to demonic possession. Wine, especially the unfiltered, pulpy, sun-thick varieties most Romans drank, wasn't the clean, sparkly Merlot you're imagining. It was closer to liquid bread, dense, raw, fibrous, and full of remnants from the grape skins, stems, and whatever else the winemaker's goat may have stepped in. This was wine with texture. Sometimes it was so thick you had to chew it. Poorer Romans often relied on wine to stretch their calories, mixing it with a crust of old bread was breakfast. Diluting it with barley water made it into dinner soup. You could also warm it with herbs and spices if you were feeling fancy or desperate. And because they didn't have multivitamins or Instagram wellness coaches, many believed wine gave you vital life essence, something between a power smoothie and an alchemical potion. Now here's the fun part. Roman doctors, those charming, medieval-adjacent mystery men with togas and scalpels, prescribed wine for everything. And I mean everything. Fever, joint pains, or infections needed wine, and more wine. This wasn't just a casual home remedy thing either. The most famous Roman medical texts, like the Galenic Corpus, which were basically the WebMD of the ancient world, are overflowing with wine-based recipes. Galen personally categorized over 100 types of wine, each with its own properties. Some wines were warming, some were cooling, some were good for the liver, and others were good for getting over breakups. There was even wine with added ingredients, creating the ancient version of cough syrup. They'd infuse wine with myrrh, garlic, frankincense, rosemary, or even crushed pearls if you were feeling especially opulent and vaguely deranged. Some wines were boiled down into thick syrups called defrutum or sapa, which doubled as medicine and sweetener. Kind of like a first-century Gatorade concentrate, but with more hallucinations. And then there was therapeutic wine bathing. Yes, seriously. Some doctors believed that bathing in wine, especially old vinegary wine, could relieve skin conditions, heal wounds, or just soak the bad vibes out of your pores. Imagine a spa where everything smells like a vineyard dumpster in July. And let's not skip over the digestive side of things either. Romans believed wine got your system moving. You would take a bit of dry wine to settle the stomach if you had had too much food. On the other hand, you would have a sweeter wine to kickstart the appetite. Wine was used both as a laxative and a causative. There was a wine for every poop problem, and sometimes for problems that didn't exist until the wine invented them. Not only that, but the Romans believed wine could cure melancholy, hysteria, overactive emotions, and even dreams sent by angry spirits. They wouldn't have called it anxiety, but if you were spiraling emotionally because you forgot to sacrifice a goat to Saturn, a tall cup of spiced Falernian wine might just calm your nerves. So we've established that Roman wine wasn't just for sipping and swirling. It was food, it was medicine, it was gut cleanser, and gut filler. But before we get into wine's role in sacred rites and divine libations, we need to understand something crucial. Wine, in Rome, was also deeply cultural, a symbol of power, class, and even cosmic order. This wasn't just a beverage, it was a liquid social contract, steeped in meaning from the villa to the temple. The social hierarchy at play when drinking wine can be visible from the first glance. The upper class drank finer, imported, aged wines, ones stored in resin-sealed amphorae with enough preservatives to outlive a Caesar. The lower classes made do with vinegary swill, watered-down leftovers, or pasca, a sour wine water vinegar concoction that tasted like someone dared you to drink salad dressing. And that's what Roman soldiers drank by the gallon. Pasca was believed to energize the body, cleanse the gut, and keep your intestines from staging a rebellion. It was so revered that even the famously pragmatic Julius Caesar reportedly drank it during campaigns. Whether that's because he loved it or just didn't trust Gaulish water is up for debate. Let's also not forget the ritualistic element here. Medical wine wasn't just drunk, it was sometimes poured onto wounds or rubbed into the skin or mixed with ashes from burnt herbs to make ointments. Some treatments called for wine boiled with lead, and others for wine strained through wool, presumably to bless you with both health and a subtle, sheepy aroma. And the best part? The doctors were often winging it. There were no clinical trials, no FDA, just a bunch of guys in robes looking at your swollen foot and saying, "You know what this needs? A goblet of raisin wine and some time." To them, wine wasn't a luxury. It was medicine you could drink at lunch. And honestly, we've all met someone in a book club who treats their Pinot the same way. So next time you reach for a glass of wine and say, "It's good for my heart," just know you're continuing a proud, if slightly fermented, Roman tradition. How you drank wine was of great importance. In the Roman world, how you consumed wine said everything about who you were. If you drank it straight and undiluted, that was barbarian behavior, the kind of thing a Gaul might do right before charging into battle shirtless and screaming. Civilized Romans always diluted their wine with water, sometimes as much as a 3-to-1 ratio. The idea was that moderation reflected virtue, self-control, logic, and Romanitas. So if someone poured you a cup of pure, heavy Falernian without a drop of water, you had to wonder, are they trying to get me drunk? Or are they not even Roman? This practice became so tied to identity that in elite social settings like symposia, the Roman version of a hangout with couches, poetry readings, and a slightly elevated chance of philosophical dueling, the amount of water added to the wine became a coded message. Too much water, and you were cheap. Not enough, and you were reckless. Just the right mix, and you were probably quoting Virgil and flirting with your neighbor's wife. Even the vessels used to drink wine were status symbols. The wealthy sipped from cut glass, imported silver goblets, or ornate ceramic kylixes. The poor drank from rough pottery, wooden cups, or whatever hadn't cracked in the last earthquake. One's cup could literally become part of your social resume. And while we're here, wine wasn't just social, it was seasonal and regional. The type of wine you drank could suggest your origin, your political leanings, or even your moral fiber. Campanian wines grown near Mount Vesuvius were considered fiery and bold, very popular among soldiers and senators with a taste for drama. Etrurian wines were smoother, lighter, think brunch wine. And then there were the sweet raisin wines of Crete, considered indulgent, even sensual. Even in more restrained settings, wine carried a kind of moral weight. Philosophers debated the right amount of wine to drink. Cato the Elder, famously grumpy, warned against overindulgence, while Seneca allowed for modest drunkenness if it led to clarity or catharsis. In their view, wine could be a tool of moral introspection, provided you didn't end the night hugging a statue of Jupiter and crying about your ex. All of this leads us to a crucial point. Wine was a liminal substance. It lived between boundaries, between clean and dirty, between food and drug, between everyday life and ecstatic abandon. It was a drink that could nourish or destroy, elevate or disgrace, depending on how it was used and who was watching. And it's right at this border between chaos and reverence where we take our next step. Into the temples, the altars, the sacred festivals, where wine didn't just accompany prayer, it was the offering. Because in Rome, everything, even marriage and war, eventually came back to the gods. And of course, wine, sweet, vine-born, fermented glory, was right there in the middle of Rome's spiritual snack table. Wine wasn't just a drink, it was a sacred connector between mortals and the divine. This wasn't a society where alcohol was kept separate from religion. The Romans basically believed the gods invented the stuff. It was like liquid Wi-Fi for your soul. Sip it, and you're connected to the heavens. The Roman pantheon had Bacchus, the god of wine, known to the Greeks as Dionysus. But let's be real, Bacchus was less of a chill vineyard guy and more of a party animal with a flair for chaos. His festivals, the Bacchanalia, were not your average church potluck. These were full-blown, raucous, multi-day affairs that featured wild dancing, ecstatic trances, suspiciously dramatic poetry, and an excessive amount of wine. In fact, the Bacchanalia got so wild and so concerningly popular that the Roman Senate tried to shut them down in 186 BCE. They feared these wine-fueled gatherings were spreading dangerous ideas like freedom, rebellion, and consensual dancing. Still, Bacchus never really left the Roman imagination. Wine continued to be the divine beverage of choice, poured at altars, sipped at sacred feasts, and sloshed around during processions where people wore ivy crowns and tried to dance like satyrs on vacation. But Bacchus wasn't the only deity to get a sip. Romans regularly poured wine as libations, ritual offerings to the gods. Before a meal, you might dribble some wine on the floor for the household gods, the Lares and Penates. Before a battle, you might pour a full cup for Mars, just to let him know you'd prefer not to be impaled today. Even Jupiter, king of the gods and eternal lightning bolt hoarder, got his share during grand ceremonies. It was like tipping your bartender, but your bartender controlled the weather and could smite your family. And it didn't stop at official rituals. Wine was baked into the everyday spiritual atmosphere of Roman life. Funerals, weddings, and birthdays all featured some wine for good luck, just as they do today. It was there for beginnings and endings, for life's most significant moments. What's more, wine was considered a purifying agent. It was thought to ward off evil spirits and cleanse both people and sacred spaces. When a Roman priest prepared for a sacrifice, he didn't just roll up in his ceremonial robe and wing it. There were rituals, incense, chanting, and yes, wine sprinkled carefully over the altar, over the victim, and sometimes even on the priest himself. A divine rinse cycle, if you will. And let's not forget the Vestal Virgins, those temple priestesses dedicated to Vesta, goddess of the hearth. Even they, with all their strict rules and sacred responsibilities, used wine in rituals, not to drink, but as a symbol of fertility, vitality, and divine fire. Because in Roman eyes, wine wasn't just a drink, it was life, fermented. Even the act of planting and cultivating vines carried spiritual weight. The poet Virgil, in his epic Georgics, wrote about winemaking as a kind of sacred art, blending human labor with the blessings of the gods. Tending to your vineyard wasn't just agriculture, it was communion. Moreover, intoxication was believed to be a sort of stairway to heaven. Some cults, particularly those influenced by Eastern mystery religions, believed that drinking wine could put you in touch with divine visions. You'd drink, fall into a trance, and possibly receive messages from the gods. You know, like your drunk uncle at Thanksgiving, but spiritually endorsed. In Rome, to drink wine was to participate in something bigger. A worldview where the gods were always watching, and it never hurt to raise your cup, just in case. After all, in a world where Jupiter might smite you for wearing the wrong tunic color, wouldn't you want to stay on his good side with a little wine? So were the Romans drunk all the time? In short, no, not unless they were rich, off-duty, or a poet, the Roman trifecta of alcoholism. Most Romans drank low-alcohol, watered-down wine throughout the day, like sipping weak tea that made you mildly buzzed and very chatty about aqueducts. Wine was a necessity, a disinfectant, a tradition, and a divine connection, all in one. They didn't drink it to get drunk, they drank it to survive, and also because Romans, quite frankly, had impeccable taste in avoiding cholera. So the next time you swirl a glass of Merlot and pretend to detect hints of blackberry and historical superiority, remember, you're carrying on a 2,000-year-old tradition. You're not day drinking, you're time traveling. Salud, amici, and may your water be clean and your wine be diluted just enough. Thanks for watching, and subscribe for more exciting history content.